Great to see everybody this morning. I'm going to let you know we are going to finish up what we started last week. And so if you weren't here last Sunday, we'll let you know and kind of catch you up a little bit so that you're not behind at all. Talking about church, okay, and not so much preaching as we are talking about ministry and about strategy in the church. Now, here's the thing. The church is the bride of Christ. It is the household of God. It is the people of God. And so we need to understand church. We need to understand what ministry is all about. We need to understand the strategy about church. And the way I introduced it last week really is still kind of where we are this morning. And it's time out for just a second. And really that's what we're doing last week and also today is just taking a time out to talk about strategy a little bit. If you've ever played sports before, if you've ever had a kid before and they've been misbehaving, timeout is this really handy thing that you can use to bring about a break in the action, to cause your child, if they've been misbehaving, to think about what they've been doing and to straighten up and to do better from that point on. And it's kind of the same thing with a team, right? I mean, you get them off the court, you talk about strategy, you talk a little bit about kind of how things were going, the way things need to go. You get everybody's kind of mind back in the game, kind of get them refocused and redirected so that they are more productive and effective when they get back out on the court or they get back out on the field. And so that's kind of what we're doing as a church. This Sunday and last Sunday. Next week, we're going to start something totally new. We've got a new message series called Invite, and we'll tell you about that next week. But today, we're going to finish up what started last week. We had a deacons retreat, told y'all that last week, with the staff and the deacons. And the deacons said, hey, Gary, you need to share this with the church. Now, there's way too much information to tell you everything that we talked about at the retreat. But today is the second half of what we started there. And so taking your church to the next level. Now, mainly what we're going to be talking about this morning is about leadership and choice points. Now, we're going to be talking about it in the context of the church, but I also want you to think about it in the context of who you are. Because every single one of us, we lead in different places. You lead it in your homes. You lead at work. Maybe you own your own business. Maybe you've got a division that you're over. Maybe you've got some employees that work for you. Maybe you're in college and one day you're going to. So you need to understand what kind of leader you are because that's going to help you and matter to you. We need to understand leadership here in the church because that makes a difference in the ministry. And then we're also going to talk about choice points. And choice points are those just really critical decisions that you make on an individual basis and that we make on a church-wide basis, both those in the past and then those also in the future. So when we get there, I want you to think about what choice points you've had in the past that affect kind of where you are right now in life, and then the choice points that you can see coming up in your future and how that's going to affect your future, okay? And so leadership, leading through the stages. Leader, you have to be looking out the windshield, not the rear view mirror to get where you're going. And I mean, that's just kind of common sense. We get it. We understand that. So church leaders, they can and they do interrupt this typical process of this life cycle we've talked about last week, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But some churches, some businesses, some relationships, they flame out in the early years, never to reach their full potential. Others overcome the predictable downward drop by continuing to focus resources on outreach, even as the church grows older. And so we talked about this life cycle of a congregation. And really where we are right now as a church, we're hitting this growth part, kind of moving into stability. And we talked about, a name for that last week. But here's what has to happen in your life spiritually, in the relationships that you have with key people in your life, and also in the life of a church, is that when you hit that stability point, if you don't do what's necessary to redefine the relationship, to redefine the mission of a church, to redefine the mission, the vision of your business, and then redevelop those things, put in new processes, new ways of talking to your husband or your wife, or dealing with your kids, that's the redevelopment part. And when you do the redefinition and the redevelopment, you get a rebirth. And it kind of puts you back on that growth curve in your spiritual walk as a person, the relationship that you have at home, and then even here in the ministry of a church. And so the tendency is to follow this basic life cycle. And the only way you break it, okay, is intentional, sustained powerful intervention by you. So that means if you've got habits that you've developed in your personal life, and it's kind of the new year, so it's kind of a good time to talk about that. The only way you break ingrained habits in a relationship or in a church or in your own personal life is that it's going to require sustained effort on your part to redefine who you are and to set a new course for you in your life. Now, we're in church, and we need to remind everybody of this, is that is through a relationship with Christ. I mean, there are some things that you can do on your own without God. People do that all the time. But as a follower of Christ, having Jesus living inside of you, really what he does is he gives you new desires, new wants, new hopes, new dreams for what your future may be. And as he does that, he empowers you to get those things done. And so for us, our vision is to reach people who are far from God and lead them to a personal relationship with Christ. And so that's what we've constantly got to come back to as a church, for me as the pastor, to remind you this is what we're all about. That's what God made the church all about, to go and to make disciples of all the nations, and to baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and then to teach them everything that God has told us that we need to be obedient about. So here's some observations about leadership. From a leadership perspective, it takes uncommon ability to adjust one's leadership style to fit the changing needs of a congregation. That's not just for me, it's for the deacons too, as it travels along our life cycle. And so the bottom line is that it takes different skills to lead a church during each stage of its life. So I've got to know that, and then I got to be able to do that. Same thing with your business, same thing with your marriage. Listen, when you're 20 years old, versus when you're 40 years old and you've been married 20 years, it takes a different set of skills to love your wife, to love your husband, to run your business than it did when you just got started in those things. And so the same principle applies in all of our lives. Now here's some different leaders, and there's some notes there on the back of the bulletin that you've got. But a catalyzer leader, okay? It is during the emerging stage, this is when a church is first getting started of the congregational life cycle. A church looks to the founding pastor to be a catalyzer. And this catalytic leader is a person who has the ability to bring something into being that did not formerly exist. I mean, that's the definition of an entrepreneur in the business world. Now, some other things about this leader is that it evidences these three essential skills. Number one, you got to have vision. You got to know where you're going, because you can't take a group of people, you can't take a family to where you want them to go unless there is a vision for that family, for that church that you have as a leader. And so there's got to be vision, there's got to be communication, and there's got to be motivation. And you might be that kind of leader, you may not. But some of us fall into those categories of being kind of an entrepreneur, kind of a catalyzer type of leader. They've got the ability to define and communicate a clear direction for the future of a church. Oh, that didn't go. Come on. Let's see how hard I have to hit it. For the future of the church, which requires foresight to see the opportunity. So you've got to be able to stay focused on what that vision is in a church's life. There it is. Okay. Second thing is this. You've got to have the skill to express ideas in a clear, simple, and direct manner in one-on-one or in groups. You've got to be willing to listen to other people because you're trying to lead them. It means you've got to listen to husbands, you've got to listen to wives, you've got to listen to kids sometimes. And catalyzer leaders, these are the ones that are able to motivate themselves and other people to fulfill the vision. And they're given 110% every single day, because if they don't, at the emerging part of a church or a business or a family, then nobody else around them is going to put forth the effort unless they see the leader doing those things. They're going to have a passionate commitment to action, create success with a fierce can-do attitude, may find it difficult to pastor a congregation beyond the first 2 or 3 years unless they're able to adjust their leadership style. Now, adjusting leadership styles is going to be critical for all of us, because we're all going to face different points and times in our life where we have to lead differently than the ways that we have led before. And so the next leadership style, as a church grows, or even as a family grows or business grows, is this organizer leader. And it's got the ability to take a disorderly organization and bring together its jumbled pieces into an orderly form that maximizes success. And so everything, if it's going to continue to be successful, has got to be organized. I know people say, well, I don't like organized religion. Well, let me tell you, disorganized religion would be a whole lot worse, because we wouldn't have paid our bills and the lights wouldn't have come on this morning and we wouldn't have had any heat. And so organization is a good thing, okay, in its proper place. So they've got the skill set to develop internal systems and different things that you've got to do. They're multitaskers who juggle well, and they relish the challenge of bringing chaos or bringing order out of chaos, kind of just putting everything together. And some of you, I mean, that just defines you. I mean, you are an organizer. You love to just like take your kids and let's organize everything. You got little boards up on the wall and little tasks lists and little stars by their names, and you're telling your husband, this is what, 1 through 10, this is what you need to get done this week. You want to organize everybody around you, and that's just kind of how God has made you. Did I skip one? They need more challenge. This is important for you to understand about yourself. They need more challenges when the initial organization is done. I see this sometimes in my house. My wife is a great organizer. Like, we've had some kids that have moved out of the house, so you need to organize the next set of kids. When there's a task that's been finished and you need something else to do, you get bored, and so you look for something else. Now, people who like to change jobs frequently, and you get frustrated in that job, and you're like, I'm bored with this, I got to go do something else. You might be the organizer, because you got there was this huge job for you. You had to fix everything and get everybody in order and get them all straight, and now they're straight, and you don't know what to do. And you're just looking for that next task. And so there might not be that next task at that job. And so you feel like, man, I just got to change jobs and go to another job so I can fix whatever's wrong there. That's just who you are. Either you need to find a new spot to fix there where you are, or you might have to move forward to find something else to take care of. So after the organizer leader, though, there it is, the operator leader. That's the next style. And really for our church, we're in the consolidating stage, kind of entering into that right now. And so this is the kind of leadership that, at least this is saying, that I would need to have. Likes to manage stable congregations by making small incremental changes that maintain basic systems. Says they bring great unity and calmness to a congregation, but can become frustrated when faced with disorder or major changes. Enjoy times when ministry runs smoothly. Reports, meetings, and procedures are a joy to this type of leader. Let me just tell you this about me. That's not me. Even though that's what the church needs at this point in time, that is not what I typically am. I'm more the catalyzer. I'm more the organizer. The operator thing, I mean, you can ask the staff. Reports and meetings and policies, they're somewhere down here at the bottom of my list of things that I enjoy doing. I understand the need for it. I mean, I get it, and I'm going to change my style of leadership to be what the church needs at this time. But that's just kind of, that style of leadership. And that may be where you are. You love to sit down and have meetings and reports. And here's the thing, too. If you sit down with other folks at work or maybe at home, and you want to have a meeting, and you want to have reports, and you want to write things down, and they're pulling out their hair, and they wish that you just leave them alone and don't take them to another meeting, they're not that kind of leader. I mean, it's just not their style, and they struggle with that style of leadership. So if you know that about you and you know that about other people, sometimes that helps you kind of get through some of those interpersonal problems. This is not what we need right now. It's what we've needed in the past, but it's a different style of leadership. When a congregation enters into the declining stage, this is a new type of leader to turn things around, to reorganize things. They have the skills and charismatic personality to keep long-term members in a church happy while they're building a new vision and agenda for the future. They're able to please long-term members and build simultaneously. It's like building a new congregation within the old wineskin, an old church or old congregation. You got to have exceptional people skills, allowing them to maintain credibility and likability with the established members while reorganizing the church to attract new people. And that's not always an easy thing to do. That might be something that you face in a business format as well. And then there is the super reorganizer leader. That's like a church is dying and you just have to take drastic changes to fix and straighten out everything that's going on in a church. Now, here's some turnaround observations. And this is true about me, and it's also true about this church. Somewhere between the 15th and 20th years, when we talk about kind of the age of this church, the original pastor and members begin to realize that God has faithfully brought about their dream to fruition. But this time, the pastor, along with most of the members of the original team, he's in his 40s, okay, right in the middle of that. After 2 decades of struggle, they all rejoice in the completion of their vision and settle in to reap the benefits of a mature ministry. Okay, listen, I give you permission. If I do that, you need to call me out on it, because I can't do that. That is not God's call on my life. That is not God's call on our church. Our vision is to reach people who are far from Christ and to lead them to a personal relationship with Christ. Don't let me, because I'm in my mid-40s and I've been here 20 years, and don't let the original group of folks that have been here for 15 or 20 years, with us, sit down and think, well, we're just not going to try anymore. Because that is absolutely, it leads to a loss of vision, and it leads to a loss of the presence of God in a church. And so we have to continually keep the vision in front of us. And so fortunately, you're not condemned to do that. I mean, you go back to that life cycle in your life, you go back to the life cycle of a church, and you're able to interrupt that sustained growth, you're able to interrupt that decline and go back and begin to grow again, both individually. You get in a rut, you're in a plateau, you can grow again. We get in a rut as a church, we can come back and we can grow again. It just means that we've got to introduce new vision, new procedures, new directions, those types of things. And that's kind of what we're doing right now. Then also about new growth is that it makes it tough to introduce those new things, because it's at the point where the church is doing really well and it's growing and we're reaching people, that you have to introduce new things, new vision, new procedures, new direction for the church to continue to grow. It's just like in your marriage. I mean, you don't want to wait till your marriage is in a decline or it's dying to try and do things to bring about new growth. I mean, the ideal thing is this, is while the relationship is just at its peak and doing great, you still keep doing those things to keep that marriage right there at the top. It doesn't mean that if it's declining or dying, you don't do things. I mean, you do. It's just harder to change it at that point. And so the same thing happens in a church. And so with a church, and this is really important, there are choice points along a church's life that you can look at. And so as I talk about the church, I want you to listen to that. But I also want you to think about your life, about the choice points that you have had in the past, and also the points that you think there may be in the future. And so leaders who make strategic choices to renew the ministry see continuous renewal, and those who don't, then they see a downturn. Okay, so here's some of the past choice points for this church, things that we have decided that were really critical in the life of the church. We've had a lot of renovations to our facilities over the course of the last 15 or 20 years. We've spent a lot of money on the buildings, which is important because they were built in 1957, some of them. And you just, you got to update those things. We've had new staff hires, Rachel and Craig and Casey. We started the weekday preschool about 9 years ago, and that was a huge decision for the church to be able to do that. We started this service about 2004, and so that was a huge decision, again, a good choice point here for the church. Building that building in the back for our children's ministry. We've bought additional land along the way. The land that's up at the very top that's just dirt right now, we bought that a number of years ago. And so those are some of the things that we have done in the past. Here's some of the future points that we see that we're going to have to decide as a church. Number one is additional parking. I mean, we talked about that a little bit last week. I showed you some pictures. But we're parking a lot of cars on the dirt. And when it's been raining and it's muddy, it's really hard to do that. And you could get stuck. Additional building. Covered drop-off. We need that right now whenever it's raining here at the church. A covered walkway from the children's building over here to the worship center. Expanded foyer and restrooms and cafe area. That's kind of part of the long-range vision that we've got, is this foyer expands that direction and we enlarge it and put some new bathrooms and things like that. Those are future points that have to do with building. But about ministry, a second Bible study time. I mean, right now we're using all the rooms that we have. They're not full, but we really can't start but maybe one or maybe two more classes. And so there may be a time in the future, near future, where we go to 2 different Bible studies. 3 services. 8:30, 10, 11:30. That may be, and it will be, a future choice point for us. And that could be hard on us as a church to figure out how all that works and what that looks like. additional staff, acquisition of additional land. And so as we grow through the stages, there's some things that help you to grow through stages. We've got spiritual resources. That's our doctrine. That's the fact that we pray. We've got directional resources. That's the experience and the quality of the leadership. That's me and Craig and Rachel and Casey. That's the deacon body. That's our small group Bible study teachers. That's the directors of the different ministries that we've got, like First Impressions or our security or the Awana ministry and different things that are like that. We've got relational resources. You know, if a church is in conflict and people are fighting with one another, you're not going to grow. It's going to be really hard to reach people for the Lord. But if there's unity and there's fellowship and there's harmony in a group of folks, easy to grow. Not hard at all. Then you've got structural resources. That's just the more flexible the structure of a church is, the greater potential for growth. The more rigid a structure is, the harder it is to be able to grow because you just can't make decisions that you need to make. And then there's the physical resources. A good location adds positive capital. I mean, we've got a great location here at the church. I mean, we've got lots of cars that drive by here every single day and see all the facilities. And so here's what happens with church sizes. These are just kind of plateau areas that churches hit at 35 and 85 and 125 and 200, 400, 800. And you see the rest of them. And right now where we are is that we're at that 400 level. And here's how that works is that you bounce around it. You might be at 350 and then you're at a little bit more than 400, then you're back down to 380 and then you're at 425. And you bounce around that number, and that's where we are right now as a church. So we're at another kind of change point as a congregation that it's important that we know these things. So the relational church is just kind of built on relationships. That's anywhere from 15 to 20 or 200 members. The managerial church is where we've been and kind of where we're leaving is 200 to 400. Then you got that organizational church, which is 400 to 800, and then you have a couple of other churches that are bigger than us. And really, the size of a church is what kind of changes how churches are led and how they're handled. On a managerial church, the important thing is to be able to give up in any given moment all that we are for what we can become. We do that on a business level. We should do that on a church level too, to be able to continue to lead people to relationship with Christ. And so the middle-sized churches are characterized by their organizational structure. As a church grows larger than 200, the essential nature of the church changes from focusing on relationships to more organization and different things like that. Pastors who flourish in this church are often gifted administrators, and they're able to function well in that administrative capacity. If your business is in that organizational phase where it's kind of like that middle-sized business and you're doing all the organization, man, that's great for you. I mean, you're gifted there. If you're not an organizer, you're gonna struggle at that point. Here's some key points of transition, and I'm just going to summarize that. You've got to be able to add staff in a church for a church to grow. There's just so many relationships and people that I can know and have relationships with. There's so many relationships that Craig or Casey or Rachel can have. And so for a church to grow, what you do is you add staff, and as you add staff, the church is able to grow. You're supposed to add support staff kind of, if you've got 3 full-time staff members or 4, you should have either 3 or 4 full-time support people in the church. And we're a little light on the support. That's not exactly equal to our staff, but that's just one of the things that happen in a church as it continues to grow, is that you add staff members. Senior pastor has to become a leader. It's not so much that he does things so much anymore as that he leads the process of all these things. Some other things that he's responsible for is long-range planning and directing multiple staff, casting vision for the future. I got to be able to preach good, design systems to reach and to win and then to keep new people. Some key points of transition. Laypersons, I mean, that's you. The church begins to do more ministry because I can't, Craig can't, Rachel can't, and deacons can't. And so really what happens is more and more people in the church are the ones that are doing ministry in the church. And we see that already happening here at Second Baptist. Roles of the staff change. We've talked about that a little bit. And then some other key points of transition. You adding additional worship services. Whenever this service or the one at 11 o'clock reaches about 300 or so, and that's not a hard number, But whenever we're consistently reaching about 300 in the service, we're out of room. And so we'll have to start talking about adding a third service, and then what that looks like and the times that looks like and what service goes at what different time frames. And then also parking. I don't know if you think about this, but basically 1.33 people per car. And if you don't have places for people to park, then they're not going to be able to come to church. It doesn't matter how big your sanctuary is. And so basically we need about 225 spaces to have 300 people here in worship. And right now we've got about 200 spaces or so on our parking. Most of those things are dirt right now. And then you want to build on success. The ministries, the people, the things that are happening in the church that are doing really well, then those are the things that you want to build on for success in the future to continue to reach people. Then there's this organizational church where there's like 400 to 800 worshipers, and that's kind of the place that we're moving into. It says this, that as a church grows beyond 400 in worship attendance, expectations of staff members begin to change, and no longer is their main concern the doing of ministry. It now becomes critical that they build teams of people to help them do that. And so the problem is that doing ministry and building teams requires a different set of skills. And some staff members may make the transition well, but other people may struggle. Sometimes it's easier just to do it than to build teams that you oversee to do ministry in the church. And then it says this, the pastor's role, again, becomes more of a leader rather than a manager or a caregiver. Teams of specialists are developed. That means that the people on staff and even volunteers become more specialized in the things that they do. They're not doing 20 things, now they're doing like 2 things in the church because the church has just gotten a little bit larger. There's some leadership development that's got to happen. I mean, more of us have to learn how to be leaders and to lead other people here in the church and the ministries that we've got. And then new ministries have to be developed. We talked a little bit about the camo ministry for the men, the IF ministry for the women, and those that have started here just really in the last semester here at the church. And then caregiving by laypersons. I already mentioned that, just how much more important it is that we are caring for one another and praying for one another, visiting each other in the hospital, just helping each other out in those different things that we face in life. And then just some last thoughts that I had for you. The larger a church becomes, the more it's got to look forward into the future and focus on issues and needs that are removed in time and space from its current situation. And then it's my job, and it's the job of the deacons and the job of our leaders in our Bible studies and other ministries to keep a spiritual focus here in our church and to keep the vision alive. And the vision is to reach people with Christ, to lead them into that relationship with the Lord. And this is just a great quote, I think, for all of us, regardless of where you are in your life, that when you're through changing, you're through. It doesn't matter if you're 85 years old or you're 15 years old. There are changes that life requires of us. Life is going to require you do marriage differently. It's going to require that you raise your children differently as they get older. It's going to require that we do church a little bit differently as we grow as a congregation. And so when you're through, when you say I'm through changing, you're through. You can't say that. I know sometimes it's hard and it's difficult and you don't want to have to go through that, but it's a truth for us. And so our vision, that is what never changes for us, to reach people for Christ, for those that are far from Him, that they might know Jesus as their Lord and as their Savior. Now, for you, as we leave this morning, here's what I want you to remember. I want you to think about, go back. What kind of leader are you? Were you the catalyzer leader? Were you the organizer leader? Were the operator leader? Were the super reorganizer? I don't know which leader you are, but think about which one you are, because that matters in your home. It matters in the jobs that God has for you. And then I want you to think about the choice points that you've had in your life. That's a great thing to go back and do. Look in your past. Think about those choice points that you have made in the past. The people that you've married, the children that you've decided to have, where you've decided to take a job and to work. I mean, and to go through those thoughts in your mind about what choice points have been in the past, and then think about, what are the ones that you've got there in the future for you? And what effect, what difference are they going to make in you? And what decisions should you make when you get there? For your spiritual life, for your relationship with the Lord, for the marriage life that you've got if you're married or maybe you're dating somebody. But think through those decisions that you're making and pray through those things. Because it's going to be the Lord who directs our steps if we will just trust Him and rely on Him and have faith in Him. So let me pray for us, and then we're going to get Casey and the band back up here, and we'll have our invitation.